You know, I flew with the Blue Angels, and then I went, when we were filming, my deal was, when I made my deal, I said, I've got to fly in the F-14. I made it with the studio. And I had to be filmed in the F-14, live.
Long before Top Gun became a cultural monument of the 1980s, an entire world of hidden decisions, rewrites, staged illusions, and real-life consequences pulsed beneath the surface of the film's sleek exterior. The movie that millions watched as a high-octane fantasy of speed, courage, and rebellion was, behind the scenes, a knot of production conflicts, military interventions, aerial trickery, and tragedies that never made it to the screen. Today, we will unveil shocking cinema secrets you missed in Top Gun. Let's dive straight in. Pentagon influence and script manipulation. In the mid-1980s, when Paramount Pictures set out to make Top Gun, the producers, Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson, entered into an unusually close relationship with the U.S. Navy. They needed real aircraft carriers, active-duty pilots, and F-14 Tomcats to pull off their vision of maximum action. According to the Washington Post, the Department of Defense agreed to give them access to Miramar Naval Air Station, 4 aircraft carriers, and over 24 fighter jets in exchange for creative control over the script. Indeed, for roughly $1.8 million, Paramount gained these military resources. But the deal came with strings. The Navy insisted on reviewing, editing, and approving key elements of the screenplay. One of the most significant and well-documented outcomes of this arrangement was how Goose's tragic death was rewritten. In early drafts of the Top Gun script, Lieutenant Nick "Goose" Bradshaw was supposed to die in a mid-air collision between 2 F-14 aircraft. However, the U.S. Navy strongly objected to this version. Pentagon officials felt that having a mid-air collision would be a bad recruiting message. They believed it suggested that pilots crashed often. In response, the filmmakers rewrote the scene. Instead of a 2-jet collision, Goose's F-14 suffers a flameout, enters a flat spin, and the 2 men try to eject. Tragically, Goose hits the canopy while ejecting and is killed. Beyond that dramatic reversal, the Pentagon's involvement extended into character portrayals. 2 of the film's most central figures, Iceman, played by Val Kilmer, and Viper, portrayed by Tom Skerritt, were reshaped at the Navy's request. Robert Anderson, who served as the Navy's Hollywood point person, later told PBS that the Navy held substantial sway. If you want full cooperation from the Navy, until the script is in a form that we can approve, then the production doesn't go forward. This intervention wasn't superficial. The Navy insisted that Iceman be more than just a rival to Maverick. He was to be seen as a highly disciplined, commendable aviator, a model pilot who embodies competence, not merely an antagonist. Meanwhile, Viper, the commanding officer and Top Gun instructor, was cast in an even more heroic light. Viper's character, inspired by the real-life Rear Admiral Pete "Viper" Pettigrew, was made not only authoritative, but deeply moral, reflecting the Navy's ideal of leadership and responsibility. Even in secondary subplots, the Navy made its demands. One famously altered example concerns Maverick's love interest, Charlie Blackwood, played by Kelly McGillis. In early drafts, she was conceived as a naval officer, which would have made her relationship with Maverick a violation of fraternization rules. The Navy refused to allow that scenario. As a result, Charlie was rewritten as a civilian contractor working for the Navy rather than a commissioned officer. This change may sound minor, but it was part of a broader pattern. The Navy shaping the narrative so that the film aligned with its rules, values, and internal culture. Language and tone were also under scrutiny. Pentagon officials pressured the writers to tone down profanity. The original script reportedly contained more colorful language, which would have risked an R rating, thereby limiting the film's appeal to the youth demographic, a key target for Navy recruitment. By softening the dialogue, the filmmakers made the film more palatable and family-friendly, increasing its potential reach and positive impact. These rewrites had real financial and symbolic stakes. The Navy charged Paramount only $1.8 million for access, a bargain, especially considering that a single F-14 Tomcat in the 1980s was priced in the tens of millions of dollars. For the Navy, this transaction wasn't purely financial. It was a carefully orchestrated public relations move. According to internal Pentagon documents later made public, the cooperation with Top Gun was part of a broader strategy to rehabilitate the military's image in the wake of the Vietnam War. The impact of the Pentagon's intervention extended beyond the movie itself. Top Gun became a massive recruiting boon. Navy recruiting offices even set up booths outside theaters showing the film, capitalizing on the public's enthusiasm. After Top Gun's release in 1986, there were anecdotal reports of a 500% increase in interest in Navy aviation. That number has since been disputed, with more recent analyses suggesting the actual increase in overall Navy enlistment was closer to 8%. Regardless of the exact figure, the Navy clearly saw Top Gun as more than entertainment. It was propaganda in its most effective, glossy form. Yet, not everyone saw the changes as benign. Film scholars, analysts, and critics have argued that Top Gun, under Pentagon guidance, became a textbook example of the military entertainment complex. The term refers to the synergy between defense institutions and Hollywood. Filmmakers gain access to expensive military hardware, while the military gets favorable portrayals that serve recruitment and public relations goals. Producers and Pentagon liaisons later admitted that filmmakers who refused such changes risked losing support. The implicit bargain was clear. If you want realism, you must tell a story that glorifies the institution. Illusions of realism and staged aerial scenes. The illusion of realism in Top Gun was crafted through a precise combination of simulated cockpit environments, heavily controlled aerial footage supplied by the U.S. Navy, camera tricks, miniature work, and editing designed to conceal technical and physical impossibilities. Although the film became internationally celebrated for its high-octane depiction of naval aviation, the Fleet Defense Fighter, introduced in 1974 and serving aboard carriers such as USS Enterprise and USS Ranger during the years of filming. The Navy's regulations forbade civilians from operating the aircraft, and the F-14's two-seat configuration, pilot in front, radar intercept officer in the rear, meant that actors like Tom Cruise and Anthony Edwards could only occupy the second seat during demonstration flights. When Cruise was filmed pulling real G-forces during backseat rides in 1985 over the Pacific Ocean training ranges near Naval Air Station Miramar in San Diego, none of that footage was suitable for narrative use. The cameras could not be mounted where the Navy needed them. The actors could not speak. They could not even move normally under the actual strain. For that reason, all interior cockpit scenes that appear to show the actors manipulating flight controls were filmed in full-scale F-14 cockpit mock-ups mounted on gimbals inside hangars, allowing controlled tilting and vibration. Cinematographer Jeffrey Kimball used carefully placed lights and rear projection plates of sky footage captured during Navy training sorties to mimic real conditions. These staged environments allowed dialogue, controlled lighting, and multiple takes, none of which would have been possible inside a live Tomcat operating at speeds exceeding Mach 1. The most famous example of the film's constructed illusion was the inverted scene, in which Maverick flips his F-14 upside down directly above a Soviet-built MiG-28, and performs the now iconic Polaroid gesture. No such aircraft designation exists in real life. The MiG-28 was a fictional antagonist, jet portrayed on screen by a Northrop F-5E Tiger II, painted black with red stars. The maneuver itself was physically impossible. According to F-14 pilots who served at the Navy Fighter Weapons School in the 1980s, including Rear Admiral Pete Viper Pettigrew, the F-14's variable sweep wings, air intake configuration, and stall margin prevented it from sustaining the close inverted formation shown in the film. At the 20-inch separation implied by the shot, the turbulent airflow shedding from an inverted Tomcat's wings would have caused catastrophic loss of control in both aircraft. Filmed in 1985 on stages at Paramount Studios, the sequence was achieved using models mounted on motion control rigs built by the effects team at Paramount under the supervision of visual effects artist Gary Gutierrez. The two aircraft were shot against blue screens, composited with cloud plate backgrounds that had been captured months earlier during Navy training flights off the coast of California. The filmed plates were then manipulated to create the illusion of proximity, while dialogue and cockpit close-ups were inserted to complete the effect. Nothing about the encounter, neither the camera angles, the distance between aircraft, nor the behavior of the jets, reflected operational reality. The climactic dogfight sequence relied even more heavily on staged aerial elements, footage repurposed from Navy exercises, and miniature photography. Although the F-14 was capable of real air combat maneuvering, the Navy did not allow live weapons firings, dangerous high-G merges, or close-quarters maneuvering staged for a film crew. Therefore, director Tony Scott and aerial coordinator Commander Lord-Bejord Bozo Abel constructed the final battle from an extensive library of training footage shot by Navy cinematographers during routine sorties between 1983 and 1985. These included engagements filmed over the Fallon Range Training Complex in Nevada and from carrier-based operations in the Pacific. Because training sequences were not shot with cinematic continuity in mind, many clips featured different light conditions, cloud formations, or aircraft loadouts. An F-14 starting one moment with external fuel tanks might appear without them seconds later. The production team addressed these inconsistencies by intercutting cockpit close-ups filmed months later at Paramount, enabling the narrative to skip visually over mismatches in altitude, time of day, or aircraft configuration. Miniature photography played a crucial role in scenes too dangerous or impractical to obtain from the Navy. Paramount's effects unit built F-14 and MiG-28 models with wingspans of roughly 3 to 5 feet, constructed from fiberglass and fitted with pyrotechnic charges to simulate missile impacts and engine explosions. These miniatures were filmed at high frame rates in outdoor lighting to replicate full-scale motion. When Maverick performs a high-G brake, or when a MiG explodes into a ball of flame, those shots were usually miniature detonations composited into sky plates. The miniatures were sometimes placed on motion control rigs to produce smooth, curved paths through the air, which were later matched to the real aircraft footage through color grading and smoke trail overlays. This mixture of footage could occasionally produce continuity gaps, such as momentary changes in the angle of the sun or the thickness of clouds, but rapid cutting masked most discrepancies. Even the shots that appeared to show Tom Cruise or Val Kilmer in moving cockpits were largely constructed illusions. The cockpit mock-ups rested on hydraulic gimbals capable of a full 360-degree rotation, letting the camera capture dynamic motion without exposing the constraints of an actual aircraft cockpit. Light rigs simulated the reflection patterns produced by sunlight bouncing off clouds and ocean surfaces. Behind the actors, rear projection screens displayed aerial footage that had been filmed months earlier at altitudes ranging from 10,000 to 25,000 feet. These plates were projected at specific angles to maintain the appearance of correct parallax, the way objects move across the field of view depending on speed and direction. When Maverick appears to roll his jet to pursue an enemy aircraft, the illusion is created by a controlled tilt of the cockpit mock-up, combined with synchronized background plate movement. Sound design added an additional layer of realism on top of these staged visuals. The Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engines of the F-14 were loud, but not always sonically impressive on recorded tape. Sound designer George Waters' two layered authentic engine recordings taken at Naval Air Station Miramar with modified effects such as thundercracks, slowed-down animal growls, and explosion samples to heighten the sense of velocity and aggression. When Maverick pushes his jet into afterburner, the roar heard on screen is a composite mix that exaggerates the real acoustic signature of the TF-30, which in reality produced a deeper, less sharp tone. This mix was applied consistently across staged, miniature, and authentic footage to unify the disparate visual sources into a single auditory reality. One of the lesser-known elements of the film's aerial staging involved the use of camera aircraft. The Navy permitted the filmmakers to use a Learjet 25B specially modified for air-to-air cinematography. Piloted by Clay Lacy, a veteran of aerial filming, the jet carried high-resolution 35mm cameras mounted in its nose. Lacy filmed F-14s maneuvering over the Pacific during actual training flights, but these shots were obtained at much safer, wider distances than the film would later suggest. Through telephoto lenses, a jet several hundred feet away appears as though it is just meters from the camera. When cut together with close-ups of actors filmed on gimbals, the effect created the illusion of close-range dogfights, even though no dangerous maneuvers occurred during principal aerial photography. The final assembly of the dogfight sequence illustrates the full complexity of the film's constructed realism. Lighting conditions sometimes shifted dramatically from one shot to the next because the Navy footage was captured on different days, seasons, and locations, from the waters off Southern California to the deserts of Nevada. Tony Scott used aggressive cutting, often staying on a shot for less than 2 seconds, to prevent viewers from noticing these shifts. The mismatches that remained became part of the film's visual signature. The rapidly fluctuating background light, drifting clouds, and abrupt changes in jet position created a sense of frenetic energy, even though they reflected the limitations of assembling a battle from unrelated fragments. By the time Top Gun premiered on the 16th of May 1986, the cinematic illusion had become so convincing that many viewers believed the actors were performing aerobatics themselves and engaging in dogfights only feet apart. Yet the reality behind the film was a careful patchwork of simulations, controlled environments, telephoto tricks, miniatures, and naval training footage captured with no intention of ever appearing in a Hollywood blockbuster. But wait, that's not all. Misleading portrayals and pilot backlash. From the moment Top Gun premiered on the 16th of May 1986, active duty and retired naval aviators began publicly and privately critiquing the film's depiction of fighter pilots, pointing out that Pete "Maverick" Mitchell's reckless behavior bore little resemblance to the discipline required in real carrier aviation. At the time of the film's release, the U.S. Navy Fighter Weapons School, commonly known as Top Gun, was based at Naval Air Station Miramar in San Diego, where the movie was filmed. Instructors who had flown combat missions over Vietnam and participated in the Navy's post-Vietnam tactical reforms, including figures like Commander Ronald Wilbur Fagan and future Rear Admiral Pete "Viper" Pettigrew, commented that Maverick's repeated violations of safety rules would have led to immediate grounding and possible administrative action. One of the clearest examples was the infamous "buzzing the tower" scene, which thrilled audiences but directly violated carrier aviation protocols outlined in the Naval Air Training and Operating Procedures Standardization, or NATO-PS, manual. NATO-PS regulations prohibited low-altitude flybys without explicit clearance because jet turbulence and afterburner wash could damage equipment or injure the deck crew. In the structured environment of a carrier air wing during the 1980s, where squadrons such as VF-1, VF-2, VF-114, and VF-213 were operating the Grumman F-14, such actions would have resulted in immediate grounding pending investigation. Several aviators who flew off USS Ranger and USS Enterprise during those years remarked in interviews that Maverick's repeated disobedience was career-ending, not character-building. Aviators also objected to the portrayal of tactical decision-making in the film. In the climactic dogfight, Maverick breaks formation to pursue an enemy aircraft that has locked onto Iceman, leaving his wingman and violating a core principle of the Navy's air combat doctrine: never leaving one's section, lead, or wingman exposed. Since the early 1970s, after analyzing air-to-air engagements from the Vietnam War, including those flown by F-4 Phantom II pilots over the Gulf of Tonkin, the Navy had emphasized mutual support and strict formation discipline as essential to survival in real combat conditions. Top Gun instructors had spent years standardizing doctrine based on real engagements, and by the mid-1980s, the training philosophy emphasized clearly defined roles, communication discipline, and avoidance of unnecessary risk. This philosophy was expressed in the curriculum that produced successful deployments of F-14 air wings through the 1980s, including Cold War intercept missions against Soviet Tu-95 Bear bombers in the North Pacific and Mediterranean. The film's romanticized individual heroism ran counter to these doctrine-based realities, leading many pilots to describe Maverick not as a model aviator, but as a dramatized archetype invented for audience excitement. At the same time, the film's depiction of enemy aircraft contributed to misconceptions about foreign jet capabilities. The MiG-28, the jet battling Maverick throughout the film, was a fictional designation, and the aircraft itself was portrayed on screen by the Northrop F-5E Tiger II. In 1986, the F-5E was already a familiar sight to naval aviators because it served as an aggressor aircraft in both the U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Force. At Top Gun, F-5Es were flown by instructors to simulate high-agility Soviet fighters, such as the MiG-21 and MiG-23, during dissimilar air combat training, or DACT. The Navy's Fighter Composite Squadron 13, originally based at NAS Fallon, and adversary detachments at Miramar routinely used black or dark-colored paint schemes to make the F-5s visually distinct from fleet aircraft, giving trainees experience identifying enemy silhouettes at a distance. For the film, Paramount Studios simply repainted these F-5Es black with stylized red stars so they could serve as fictional foreign jets. Because the F-5E was small, nimble, and visually sharp when filmed against the sky, many viewers assumed the aircraft shown on screen represented advanced Soviet jets, even though by 1986, the Soviet Union's frontline fighters included aircraft such as the MiG-29 Fulcrum and Su-27 Flanker, both of which were significantly larger and more technologically advanced than the F-5E. The illusion led some audiences to overestimate the capabilities of fictional enemy aircraft and underestimate the complexity of real Cold War air power dynamics. The film's editing techniques further compounded this confusion about aircraft performance. To keep the action visually coherent, despite drawing from unconnected Navy training footage, miniature photography, and staged cockpit sequences, the editors relied on rapid cutting and telephoto compression that distorted viewers' sense of distance and speed. Telephoto lenses flatten depth, making jets hundreds of feet apart appear as though they are within meters of collision. In real naval aviation, safety protocols establish minimum separation distances far greater than what the film appears to show. For example, section takeoffs, formation flying, and air combat maneuvering are executed using specific separation requirements governed by NATOPS and squadron standard procedures. During DACT flights at Miramar in the 1980s, F-14s and F-5Es typically fought at separations of several hundred to several thousand feet, depending on the maneuver. The film's use of compressed backgrounds and selective camera angles created a cinematic illusion of near-continuous canopy-to-canopy combat that did not reflect genuine tactical spacing. Another source of misconception lay in the depiction of aircraft agility. The Grumman F-14, powered by twin Pratt and Whitney TF-30 turbofans, was a powerful but temperamental aircraft. During high angle of attack maneuvering, the TF-30 engines were prone to compressor stalls, particularly when an asymmetric throttle input caused one engine to receive disrupted airflow. This was a serious concern throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, and contributed to multiple training mishaps. Yet, the film showed the F-14 performing extremely tight, high-energy maneuvers with little indication of the aircraft's actual performance constraints. In contrast, real naval aviators flying F-14s during this period, such as those in VF-51, Screaming Eagles, or VF-111 Fourdowners, trained extensively to avoid engine stall margins during combat maneuvers. The lack of visible consequences in the film gave viewers the impression that the F-14 could maneuver like a lightweight dogfighter, obscuring the careful energy management required in real engagements. The portrayal of missile capabilities also contributed to unrealistic impressions of aerial combat. In the mid-1980s, the primary air-to-air missiles carried by F-14s were the AIM-54 Phoenix, the AIM-7 Sparrow, and the AIM-9 Sidewinder. The AIM-54 had a range exceeding 100 miles and was designed for long-distance interception of Soviet bombers, not close-quarters dogfights. Yet Top Gun largely omitted the Phoenix, focusing instead on visually dramatic short-range engagements. The omission led some audiences to assume that U.S. naval aviation relied exclusively on close-range maneuvering, when in reality, fleet defense doctrine emphasized long-range radar-guided engagements whenever possible. Pilots trained at NAS Miramar and NAS Fallon frequently stressed that the film's battles were staged around narrative needs rather than tactical plausibility. Navy aviators also objected to the film's suggestion that pilots could detect enemy intentions visually in the way Maverick appears to sense hostile maneuvers. In actual Cold War operations, situational awareness depended on radar, data link updates from airborne early warning aircraft like the E-2C Hawkeye, and radio communication with controllers aboard carriers such as USS Constellation or USS Kitty Hawk. The film's reliance on dramatic visual cues reinforced the misconception that modern air combat operates like World War II dogfighting, when in reality, radar-guided tactics had fundamentally redefined engagement geometry. Production battles, military influence, and real-world costs. Creative disagreements, logistical constraints, and last-minute studio interventions dramatically reshaped the film after principal photography ended in March 1985. Early test screenings later that year made it clear that the film lacked the emotional cohesion and structural flow Paramount executives believed it needed to succeed as a major summer release. What followed was nearly a year of reshoots, tonal recalibrations, editorial overhauls, and behind-the-scenes disputes that tested the relationship between director Tony Scott, producers Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, and the studio itself. With a fixed release date of May 16, 1986, the team had less than 12 months to rework the film under mounting pressure, all while navigating continuity problems and military oversight. One of the most significant disputes emerged when Paramount concluded that the romantic relationship between Pete Maverick Mitchell and Charlotte Charlie Blackwood lacked emotional weight in the original cut. Early drafts, written by Jim Cash and Jack Epps Jr., had placed far greater emphasis on competition, teamwork, and tension inside the Navy Fighter Weapons School at Naval Air Station Miramar. By contrast, the romance was originally a secondary thread. Test audiences in late 1985 disagreed. Studio leadership insisted that the film needed a more conventional romantic arc to broaden its appeal, even though Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis had long since moved on to other commitments. When they reunited for reshoots that fall, continuity issues were unavoidable. McGillis was already filming Made in Heaven, and her hair had been dyed darker. Cruise's hairstyle no longer matched his look from the Miramar shoot, since he had begun work on The Color of Money. The elevator scene filmed at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles used low lighting and a baseball cap to hide discrepancies in Cruise's appearance, while the parking lot argument was shot with long lenses and strategic shadowing to conceal differences in McGillis's hair length and color. Another major conflict centered on the now iconic volleyball scene. Tony Scott envisioned it as a vivid, sun-drenched interlude that captured the film's youthful energy and contrasted the technical intensity of the aerial sequences. But Paramount executives challenged the scene early on, believing it was drifting stylistically toward a glossy music video aesthetic rather than supporting the military aviation narrative. Worse, the original footage disappointed Scott, who felt the lighting fell short of the golden hour tone he wanted. He pushed for a reshoot, despite the studio's concerns about budget overruns and mounting delays. Scott later recalled that he spent roughly $25,000, including additional crew hours and location prep, without obtaining full authorization. This decision frustrated producers already navigating strict Navy access schedules at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar and other military-controlled environments. Still, Scott prevailed. The reshoot, completed in a narrow window of afternoon light, delivered the warm, stylized look that ultimately made the sequence one of the most memorable in the film. In hindsight, the studio's hesitations faded, but at the time, the conflict reflected broader disagreements about how bold or stylized Top Gun should visually be. These debates fed into a larger concern brewing within Paramount, the growing feeling that Top Gun was beginning to resemble a 2-hour MTV reel with jets, as one editor later described it. In 1985, Scott's stylistic background in commercials informed his approach to the film, especially his use of montage, stylized lighting, and dynamic camera movement. Studio memos from that period revealed a simmering anxiety that the film's narrative depth risked being overwhelmed by synthesizer-driven music sequences and high-gloss imagery. Songs like Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone and Berlin's Take My Breath Away had already been selected as marketing cornerstones, and their presence in key sequences encouraged even more emphasis on music-driven editing. Simpson and Bruckheimer supported the approach, believing the audiovisual rhythm would define the film's energy. But others within the editing department feared that the reliance on montage and musical overlays risked weakening dramatic through lines. As footage accumulated from the carrier deck of USS Enterprise shot in July 1985 to the dogfight training sequences at Miramar, editors faced a challenging task: blending gritty military realism with Scott's glossy cinematic grammar. The logistical complications created by late reshoots added further strain. Because Top Gun was produced under a cooperation agreement with the Department of Defense, Every scene filmed on military property required review and approval from Navy Public Affairs. By late 1985, the Navy had already delivered most of its promised support: flight operations aboard USS Enterprise, access to F-14 Tomcats, and the use of classrooms and hangars at Miramar. Any additional shoots meant renegotiating schedules with Captain Charles "Chuck" Bush, Lieutenant Commander Robert "Rat" Willard, and other military liaisons. This created hurdles, especially when Paramount requested tweaks to the final act, including aerial inserts that had to be patched using stock footage rather than new Navy-assisted filming. The cooperation contract imposed even tighter constraints on reshoots, limiting Scott's ability to adjust scenes without triggering new rounds of approval. As the release deadline approached, these complications intensified tensions between the creative team, who wanted flexibility, and military officials, who needed to maintain procedural accuracy and adhere to previously negotiated terms. Even as these production conflicts escalated, the film's off-screen story continued to evolve in ways no one anticipated. When Top Gun premiered on May 16, 1986, theaters in major cities soon reported Navy recruitment tables set up in their lobbies. Yet, beyond recruitment spikes and military messaging, one tragedy cast a long shadow over the entire production. Lieutenant Art Scholl, an accomplished aerobatic pilot and aviation cinematographer, was hired to capture background plate footage for aerial sequences using his modified Pitts S-2A. On September 16, 1985, while performing a maneuver intended to simulate the film's dramatic flat spin sequence, Scholl lost control of his aircraft near Carlsbad, California. His final radio transmission, "I have a problem, real trouble," marked the onset of a fatal descent into the Pacific Ocean. Despite searches by the Coast Guard, Navy units, and civilian aircraft, neither Scholl nor the plane was recovered. Production halted temporarily, and Top Gun was later dedicated to his memory. Military pilots who admired Scholl's precision and professionalism were reminded of the stark divide between cinematic flight fantasy and real-world operational risk. By the end of 1986, the film had grossed more than $350 million worldwide. Top Gun may have been engineered for maximum cinematic adrenaline, but its hidden history shows the turbulence, negotiation, and sacrifice required to bring that vision to the screen. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.